Hello, I'm Congressman Don Young, and welcome to the Alaskan Report. Tonight I have the honor and privilege, it is a little late, an honor and privilege to introduce Congressman Eleanor Holmes Norton from Washington, D.C., who serves on two committees with me, Transportation and Infrastructure, and of course Homeland Security. And she's here tonight to talk about anything she wants to talk about, but being on those two committees, and we're both working on FEMA reorganization and Homeland Security, and we thought we'd discuss those two issues or any other issue you'd like to talk about. But right now, the day has been an interesting day. We've had to, Eleanor, we had to mark up two bills, or three bills, one bill in three different committees, the reorganization of FEMA. We had it, and we had, of course, the one in Homeland Security Committee and the one in government reform. And I know you were on one side of the issue at one time, and now you seem to come back on the right side. I shouldn't say that, but what's your feeling of what's going on here and why we should be doing this as far as FEMA goes?
Well, you know, Don, I guess I could say, don't say I told you so too much, because you said from the beginning that FEMA should be the independent agency we know was a competent agency when it could be on its own, report to the president, and just get out there like the special forces. That's the analogy that occurs to me. Something's wrong, go get it. I, on the other hand, ran a federal agency during the Carter administration. It sounded to me as though this all hazards approach, you know, terrorist hazard and the natural disaster, putting them together and they'd meld and then it would work all out. But Don, I do pride myself on looking at the evidence, and in my congressional role I had to look at Katrina as a case in point, and a case in point that astonished everybody. And then I had to consider, well, can this be fixed? After all, that was an unusual occurrence, and because I think it can't possibly be fixed in the Department of Homeland Security, and I have to say why. Because in an age of global terrorism will always be the primary focus
of Homeland Security.
Of Homeland Security.
Right. Okay.
Now, you and I know that earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and all the rest of the natural disasters occur on time, like clockwork. Every year. We hope we never get another terrorist attack, and we understand. Because you and I are on Homeland Security,
right,
that somebody's got to keep their eye focused on that.
On security.
On security.
Right, right.
Well, why should we have natural disasters competing with terrorism? If you ask the American people, should there be a competition between the two, they would say, are you crazy? Well, one way to make sure there's no competition is to take FEMA out and say, look, FEMA, you're on your own, something happens, you talk to the President of the United States, and then it's go. The way it is now, no matter what we say, you got to talk to the Assistant Secretary, and then you got to talk to the Secretary. I don't think we want to go to the American people after Katrina and say there's still a bureaucracy, nice people, but a bureaucracy that FEMA has to go through to get to you, to your flood or to your hurricane. And we're, 1 month away from hurricane season. They
may even start it, we've been told there's maybe 5 of them come down the line this year, and that's scary when you think about it. But you bring up a good point. The FEMA itself has been put down. I mentioned this today in the markup, you heard me say this. If FEMA was put in the Homeland Security under the Secretary, but the organization was clear down, I often said, on the back page of the flow chart. They weren't even recognized. They had no authority, and they were disbanded to a great deal. Was it $250 million was taken out of FEMA and redispersed in the security part of it, and we lost a lot of people. In fact, we're having a hard time now getting people into FEMA because they know they don't have the ability to address a problem. And I'm hoping that this is not what the administration wants, because they won't admit a mistake. And I'm willing, I'm glad you are too, willing to say we made a mistake. I said it would happen, and I've proven my point, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm looking down the line, and you know, we could have an earthquake in California. You could have
What would we have in Alaska, by the way?
Earthquakes primarily. We're big on earthquakes, so we have about one a day.
We have floods in Washington, D.C.
You have floods in Washington, D.C., but we do have some floods, but they're not, the major cities are pretty much outside of it. But we do have a lot of earthquakes. In fact, we had the largest earthquake registered in the history of our continent, in 1964 in March,
oh, yes.
and 9.8, which was a big one. But it wasn't quite as disastrous because of our population. But I will say, even that time, we had this, I think it was called the Civil Defense Corps.
Yeah.
They moved in immediately and were able to address those problems that we were faced with and respond adequately because they were a separate agency. And I think that's what we have to, what I'm trying to do is give them, the FEMA group, the opportunity to respond as an agency to a problem, and then if they can't do it, then we know at least where the problem lies. I never really blame FEMA, quote, for Katrina. I blame Homeland because
yes.
people that are appointed to Homeland or work for Homeland, that's their main focus. They're
yes.
like this, and I give them credit for that.
And Don, look, I was, Mr. Schuster was the chairman, I was the ranking member.
You're the ranking member.
And our committee, by the way, has the primary jurisdiction over FEMA because FEMA, that primary jurisdiction has to do with natural disasters. We've always had it, and even when it was in Homeland Security, we had that part of it. The evidence that FEMA had become a stepchild in Homeland Security was overwhelming. You spoke about some of the funding that seemed to float straight into security. We now know that billions of dollars went to terrorism without assessment of risk. We know that also is being fixed. But it still continues to, according to the local officials, if you want to get a grant, best way to get a grant is to frame it in Homeland Security terms. In our several hearings, local officials complained that they felt diverted from their own coming natural disasters to deal with what Homeland Security believed was most important, and that was global terrorism. Well, I think this was not foreseeable. We did not understand that at the time. I'm the first to say, since I believed it should be in there. But now we do see.
That's right.
And once we see, I guess what really should guide us is Katrina occurred with 3 or 4 days notice of a hurricane. I think both natural disasters and a terrorist disaster are our ability to respond to either is at risk if we leave it there, because we have to assume that the agency, which everybody says is in disrepair, the White House report, the report of 3 or 4 committees over here, says that FEMA is no more ready now than it was then. And our bill won't make it more ready now, but we ought to begin now to make it more ready by at least cutting it loose so that it can begin to rebuild. And I don't see how it can rebuild reporting up the chain of command.
Well, you hit it right on the head. What I'm concerned with, as I told you before we started the show, that my leadership is saying, well, we want to take the best of both and put one part on the floor at one time and the other part on the floor at another time. And I'm saying the baby doesn't walk if you do that. And would the first part say nothing about where FEMA is? That's right. It leaves it totally blank, and then they take all the rest of the grants and everything else. And now you're on both committees as well as I am, and it's a bill about that thick now. It's a very expensive bill, and it doesn't solve the problem. It still leaves it under the Secretary of Homeland, and because their mental makeup, it won't improve their program. Regardless
so
of what
that's a victory for those who want it to remain in Homeland Security.
They want to remain it and do not want to admit their mistake.
Right.
And so what we're telling the leadership, no, we're going to, if they want to debate this on the floor, both sides, and then we'll vote on both bills. I mean, that's that simple. Let the process work. That's the way it should work. And you know, Tom Davis is one of your allies, and you work close together. He marked up the same bill we marked up today?
Well, he's going to mark it up.
Well, he's going to mark it up, but it's an identical bill.
It is, and you know, the interesting thing is, people are not. This isn't a party line matter.
No. I forgot to tell the audience, this is a Democrat and I'm a Republican. Keep that in mind. We do work together.
Well, ours is perhaps the most bipartisan committee in the whole House and always has been. But I don't know, I thought, particularly with the chairman of government reform, and by the way, Don, I'm on 3 committees.
You're on those 3 committees?
All 3 committees, government reform, transportation, Homeland Security. 3 committees in 1 week marking up the same bill. Now, I was sure that the Homeland Security Committee, that the Government Reform Committee would go with its chairman. I'm not so sure now. I think some Republicans and some Democrats, I really do think, some Democrats will say, well, I don't know, we remember that Senator Lieberman, he was a Democrat, was for the Homeland Security approach. Right. Some Republicans, and so maybe we should stick with that. Some Republicans will say, well, wait a minute, the administration seems to want it in Homeland Security. Right. So I think both sides, Democrats and Republicans, are going to be confused about what they should do, because there is no party line vote on this one.
Well, that's good, though, because I think the merits of what we did today and what government reform has done far outweigh and solve the problem. Now, that's why we should be debated on the floor, because what Homeland Security Committee does is try to fix it with Band-Aids. And it's still under the Secretary. No disrespect for the Secretary. It is the focus of Homeland, like you mentioned in your opening statement, they're focused on security, and they forget that Mr. Earthquake's coming and Mrs. Hurricane's coming. And by the way, I have to ask you a question. All the hurricanes last year were named after ladies. Are they all going to be named after men this year? You have any idea?
I thought, you know, we don't want any gender.
But it's true.
But have they always been named only? I think they used to be named after men.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So this must be the men's year. You know, at least I hope it's the men's year.
I don't know if this comes out of Mother Nature.
No, I don't name them. But it was. You were down there. You were down to New Orleans 2 or 3 times, were you not?
Yes, indeed.
And we went down one time and it was very good, very worthwhile visitation. Some of these are not so. I thought it was well done. Bipartisan group, speaker took us down, and we went from there to Mississippi and Alabama, looked at all the problems we had. And it's just not New Orleans. This is response in Alabama and Mississippi too.
Oh, I was. There were sticks left in Mississippi. I was there too.
Yeah.
One question's raised, Don, that you and I have had to confront, and that question, and I confronted it, and your bill confronts it, and that is, well, suppose the disaster is a Homeland Security disaster, and of course FEMA's independent, and what do the Homeland Security people do? Well, there is in our bill, a liaison, a standing liaison office, so they're continuing to work together as they have not, I might add, until now. So it's not as if we're disconnecting FEMA from the response it must make in the event of a Homeland Security a disaster. What we are doing is assuming it can get to the disaster the way it didn't in Louisiana. Suppose Louisiana had been. Remember, that's right on the coast.
Yep.
Suppose that had been a terrorist attack.
Yep.
Same difference.
Same difference. They still couldn't have responded.
That's right. So we do see them as interchangeable, and our bill does not cut off FEMA from its vital function, which will be as necessary in the event of a terrorist attack.
Well, one of the problems and we mentioned this fact, that they had no authority to make a decision. That was the scary part. And even though they may have had a good idea, they could implement the idea, or there was no commandership. It was always somebody else that had and by the time it got back down to them, what they should have been doing wasn't done. We experienced this, Eleanor, in Alaska, when we had the Exxon Valdez spill. And that was one of the things I've never forgotten. Alaskans will recognize it, so it's been quite a while now. I had a call from the commandant of the Coast Guard. I was flying on an airplane out to see my mother. And he says, we got a bad one, Congressman. And I said, how bad? He says, hit Blythe and it's spilling a lot of oil. I said, burn it. Because when oil is spilled, in crude oil, you only have a very short period of time that the benzenes will set the oil on fire to create the heat to burn the tars. And, you know, it works. Well, he says, sir, I can't. I said, why can't you? And he says, the state DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, said no because it'll pollute the air. The federal EPA said no because it'll pollute the air. The federal Fish and Wildlife said no because we're not sure what damage it would do to the wildlife, etc. And the state Fish and Wildlife. And so no one could make the call. And so the oil spread and the benzenes were lost and it became a tarish mass and we're still cleaning up. If the Coast Guard had the authority, they would have been able to set it on fire. Now, the reason that the Congress, they didn't have, so what we did in OPA, that's an oil spill response deal. Out of this came a silver cloud, by the way. Every major oil port now has a very serious, high-priced, well-organized, trained crew and equipment to recover oil. And that's big time, because we never had it before. Not just Valdez, it wasn't in San Francisco, wasn't anything. But we also did one other thing. If there is an oil spill now, the Coast Guard has total control.
Somebody's got to make the call.
Someone's got to make the call. And that's really what we're trying to do with FEMA, that they have the ability to make the call.
Yes.
If we do this, if, you know, and then there isn't this second guessing. And no one can point the finger because the buck stops there. You know?
This reminds me, what you just said about the oil spill reminds me of an argument that was made in our Homeland Security Committee that, well, he will really be able to avoid going through the bureaucracy and the secretary. He'll really be able to report to the president and say, just one moment, can you imagine what kind of conflict you're setting the FEMA director up for if somehow he's in a department, and every department, of course, you're under the secretary. You're under the secretary, but guess what? The secretary doesn't have anything to do with what you do. You can't do that.
You don't.
Either you can't, this is one compromise you can't make.
You can't make.
Either, or else the secretary, and you, the secretary, at some point is going to say, well, wait a minute.
Yep.
Don't I have some say here? What you just described, which is who makes the call, is exactly what we'd have.
That's right.
All over again, with the secretary saying, it's my department, you all left it here, I make this call, and FEMA saying, but I thought there was, the way I read the statute, I really can do it on my own. That leaves us worse off than we are now.
Just like we were before. And by the way, this is not new. You and I, remember, FEMA used to be outside. It used to have a cadre of its own people. It had, you know, the whole program, and that's why it works. You know, we don't have to talk all this time on just FEMA, but one of the things I was
so much on our mind now because we just came out of
Well, I was just going to ask you another question. Homeland Security. You have a problem, and I'm willing to help and trying to help you, is evacuation of Washington, D.C. if we have a terrorist attack here. This is something that really concerns me because I drive home every night across the 14th Street Bridge, and it is a mess. What happens? How are we going to change that? I thought we had a program. Did we get any money in for you that second crossing or anything out of
Yes, but I'm very glad you asked that because it applies here and it applies everywhere in the United States. Here, there is really only one recourse.
One what?
Stay put.
Stay put. Okay.
Yeah, you can't, as you say, Don, you can't get across the 14th Street Bridge as it is. It's hard to think of an attack on Washington that would be so severe that everybody would have to evacuate town. Let me pose some of the alternatives. Obviously, we're not going to have an atom bomb blast. At least I don't think so. In which case, you wouldn't want to run out into it anyway. You'd want to stay in, turn on your radio, and find out what to do. Well, suppose there's some kind of biological attack. Normally, that doesn't spread some kind of mushroom cloud, but it does. You have to clear the air. Well, you don't want people to rush out into some kind of biological attack. So the most important thing, particularly in a crowded area, you can get people to do, and certainly this is almost foremost among them, is to say, would do you any good to get out there anyway? And for the most part, that's probably the least safe thing to do. Not only do you have traffic, you may be running into the Homeland Security problem. I don't care if it was a bomb it was a plane that fell. If it fell, it's not going to fall over everything in the city. It falls on you, then you're going to have to be rescued. If it doesn't fall on you, you don't want to rush to the 14th Street Bridge and get trampled. So I just hope that in Alaska, recognize that you have a lot more open space than we do, but you also have cities and you have places that are crowded, that the message is going out. Turn on your radio, by the way. They seem to know more than we know. Find out what people are saying before you decide to take a move outside of your own door.
I knew it was a reason I asked her on this program, because this is one of my pet peeves.
Is it?
Because, you know, we have these evacuation exercises, or there's a threat here. And when I was a young man, in World War II, we were told to go underground. We had our bomb shelters, everything else. Now they run us all out on the street as a designated area.
Into the thick of it.
Into the thick, and I keep thinking, what if I was a terrorist? Now, I mean, this is not hypothetical.
Stop it.
But think about it. I would instigate these evacuations, and I'd figure out where everybody goes, and that is be the area because they're all exposed.
And we're laughing, but this is dead serious, folks.
But I tell you, Eleanor, I tell you what I do when that thing goes off. I do not leave the building.
In fact, what do we call it? The G1 area.
Yeah.
There's a part of the Capitol that's so far down that I've hardly ever been there. I think it's probably the safest place in Washington.
Well, that's what I do. There's a place down on G1 that's got 10-foot concrete walls for the foundation of this building. It's got a little room, and that's where I go, because I'm a firm believer that it's silly to be out in that street, you know. Yeah. But it did concern me, because I've been to 3 evacuations exercises here, and I didn't go through them. But I know people in my office did, and the biggest complaint they had, they're out there in the hot or cold, and they're standing in the street corner, 300 or 400 people all scattered around it. And I hope there's a little bit more thinking goes into this program.
Oh, remember 9/11 when we really did have a dress rehearsal that everybody tried to get out of town at the same time. So it turns out that that happened in nearby Virginia, but it still created a terrible situation. Disaster. Remember the farmer on the mall who decided he was going to take the tractor man, as we call him. Well, everybody wasn't trying to get out at the same time. They were just trying to get out, and still
jammed up.
The fact that he was there and the cops had to be there jammed up the whole town. Yeah. So you're so right. There are ways to take us out without a biological attack or some such.
What are your big problems in D.C.?
Well,
it is the capital for America.
It's the capital for America. Actually, the administration has been pretty good to us. I don't have a lot of complaints from them. I have worked very well with my Republican colleagues on a number of bills that I've gotten through for the city. I'm working with Congressman Tom Davis now on a bill for a House vote. It would give 1 vote to Republican Utah, 1 vote to Democratic DC, and we're going to mark that bill up. You can only get through that kind of bill if each side gets the same thing, and that's what we're trying here. But I tell you, I don't have a lot of complaints about the way my city has been treated. The new Secretary, Chief of Staff, Josh Bolton, this man is a native Washingtonian. His father was a CIA man, and he has been very good in looking out for the district. He was domestic policy advisor. He was OMB director, and he's the chief of staff. So I said, I know some place to go.
You got some place you go talk to. That's why you go picking up the phone trying to get things done. Well, I have to tell you, Eleanor, I tell a lot of people, I'm not a city person, and I never have been, but this is probably one of the prettiest cities that I have had a chance, and I've been all over the world, that I've been able to experience. And they've done a good job. It had a bad rep. It still does in a lot of places, but a lot of cities did. But when I first came down here 34 years ago, it was pretty much in chaos, and it's come back a long,
oh my goodness, it's such
ways.
a hot city now. We got a new mayor, a man who graduated from Yale and from Harvard, and
that was Yale, not jail now.
Since I am a Yale Law School graduate, who had been the chief financial officer. And the people of the District of Columbia got tired of the kind of leadership that gave us a bad rep. This man has spent 2 terms and has helped the city recover a magnificent reputation. I must say, I certainly hope at least the school kids from Alaska can get down here to see their gorgeous capital. It's so far to come. I've been once to Alaska. I know how far it is to come and how difficult it would be for kids. But I would hate them to have to wait until they're, as old as I am to see the capital of the United States.
I have to say this is one of the highlights. I started something many years ago called a Close-Up program. I'm sure you're aware of it.
I know Close-Up, yes.
And when I say I started, they had no funding, and I was in the minority, and I helped them get some funding from a private sector.
They're going strong still.
Oh, big time. And we do actually get some money in the budget for it, but before it came out of shipping companies and things that I have a relationship to. And I've had over 7,600 students come to Washington, D.C. in the last 34 years. Every year, it's 400 people, 300 people. And it's just great because they really get a better understanding about their capital. I explained to them, this is their capital. And they don't just spend it on Capitol Hill. They go out and they see a lot of other things around the area.
Great.
And it gives them an idea.
What's that, 12-hour plane ride?
It's actually 12 hours elapsed time, 11 hours in the air.
And then they have to really stay over to get their bearings.
Well, the worst part about it is the first 2 days, they're young, so they recover much more rapidly than some more senior people do. I'm not mentioning any names of those senior people are. But they really, and I feel so good about it because they always are very good about, I meet with them all the time, the senators meet with them, and they always write the nice letters. But if I can just generate one thought in their minds about being proud of their capital, I've done a good job. And they also learn about what we're doing here in Washington, D.C., so it's a good program, We have about 55 seconds. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I want people to know that, when they hear about people fighting, yeah, we do fight, and we want to be in charge, and the Republicans want to be in charge. But I've spent 14 years in the Congress, only 4 years for Democrats. It has been a magnificent pleasure to serve on a committee where people try to get things done, and none of that squabbling goes on in our committee. And I have to thank you, Mr. Chairman, because for the last 2 or 3 years, you've been the chairman who brought that off.
Well, thank you, because I believe in that, because we get things done. And we passed our bill, and you were very helpful in TLU, and that's very good. In fact, like you say, I don't think we've ever had a dissenting vote in the committee. And over 6 years.
Not on the final bill, no.
Not on the final bill. No, we can fight, but I'm in the final bill. Well, listen, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for being on the show with me.
My pleasure.
This has been the Alaskan Report. And the Congressman from Washington, D.C., Ms. Holmes, has been with me. And I'm very pleased to have her today, and thank you for watching.